So the core of our ability to do that is the collection that Barr helped create, and that is a work in progress. It's a collection that over the years has been able to acquire some of the most important works ever created. Cézanne's Bezer of 1885, often considered the first work of art in the museum's collection. A work that shows Cézanne reflecting on earlier classical ideals of the nude, but now transforming that into a very complicated picture in which foreground and background dissolve, in which the artist is as concerned with the optical effects of light as they are used to construct the body as he is with the image of the figure itself. Or Picasso's Demoiselle d'Avignon, some would argue the single most important painting of the 20th century, of 1907. Painting in which Picasso takes a classical idea, the nude female figure, and transforms that into something threatening and difficult and complicated, where he fractures the picture plane as if it was a shard, as if it were a pane of glass cracked by a hammer that fractures it into multiple pieces, in which he introduces his fascination with tribal and primitive art, which for him was a way of evoking the spirit, sometimes antagonistic, often sensual, of the female form. Or of Joaquim Torres Garcia, very important artist from Uruguay who worked in New York. And this reflects the fact that from the beginning, from the early 1930s on, the Museum of Modern Art has been committed to Latin American and Caribbean art and has developed over the years one of the most important collections in the world. Or works like this, Broadway Boogie Woogie of Pete Mondrian, often considered the single most important work of geometric abstraction, where Mondrian actually reduces the picture plane to a series of, to a grid of colors that evoke the syncopated feeling and the syncopated rhythms of New York. And Mondrian came to New York from Europe in 1942. He was used to blackouts and the dreariness of Europe during the Second World War, and he got to New York and there were lights and there was jazz and there was energy, and he tried to reflect that in this fabulous picture. Or this utterly magisterial work of Jackson Pollock, number 1 of 1951, in which the entire canvas becomes an overall feel that is the result of his choreographic moves, where Pollock realized that painting, the act of representing something in paint, actually could become the subject itself, where his movements across the canvas as he swished and swirled and squirted paint could become an object as well as a subject. And this painting has a kind of kinetic energy to it that's utterly transfixing. Or Andy Warhol's 32 Soup Cans, where Warhol came to recognize that simple, everyday subjects of consumerism, like soup cans by Campbell, something that was utterly familiar to post-war Americans, could actually be a subject of high art. And that this subject could be repeated over and over again, that seriality, the repetition of an object, could lend to it a kind of magnification of importance. Or Gerhard Richter's utterly extraordinary Baader-Meinhof series of 1987. 15 paintings that reflect on the terrorist group in Germany that committed suicide in prison on a single day in October of 1977. What these paintings do is they take photographs and they use them as the basis of these very complicated images where you can discern the photographic source, but the artist has kind of twisted the surface of the picture by blurring it. And what that does is it complicates history. It makes it difficult for us to know the veracity of what was reported. And that's Richter's single most important point, that no matter how truthful the photograph may seem to be, it actually is not truth itself. And that memory and knowledge often blur. And what we know is not a fact. That history is not a fact. History is a construct. It is the result of a collective act of thinking. And thus, he calls into question the very notion by which history is constructed. Or this, one of our most recent acquisitions by Alora and Calzadilla, a work that is actually a performance in which they took a Bechstein piano and cut out the center of it. And a performer rises from the center of this and begins to play Beethoven's Ode to Joy, except half of the notes don't exist because they were cut out in order for the performer to have room to play. And so you have to make up in your mind what is missing in terms of the music itself. Or here, one of my favorite works by Carlos Carioca, who went and photographed on the left a range of buildings in Havana that were about to be destroyed. And then he came back after the buildings had been destroyed and with very thin thread tried to reconstruct what the building actually looked like, thus creating a ghosted image. Again, we're calling into question the way memory is a central part in the construction of our knowledge of both history and art. So all of this led us, in the late 1990s, to realize we needed to completely rethink the Museum of Modern Art. That the existing buildings did not have enough space for us, did not create the kinds of spaces that would allow us to show the works of art we were interested in, and that we needed to create literally a new Museum of Modern Art. That became possible when the Dorset Hotel, which you see here, came up for sale, and a group of our trustees got together and bought the hotel for us, and suddenly we had an adjacent building that we could demolish and turn into a hotel, into a new museum. So this slide gives you a sense of what that is all about. The red is the existing buildings as they were in 1996. The yellow is the site of the Dorset Hotel and several brownstone buildings that we subsequently bought and demolished. So the new Museum of Modern Art basically plugged into the yellow space, but also involved demolishing and refiguring large parts of the existing space. To give you an idea, at the time we began this project, the museum had about 380,000 square feet. We demolished about 80,000 square feet. We added an additional 350,000 square feet. So the new museum is a building of about 650,000 square feet. How did it happen? Well, it happened very much the way you're going about your project. We created a capital campaign that was led by David Rockefeller, who you see in the center here, whose mother, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, was one of the founders of the museum. And when I sat down with David and said, so how are we going to do this? Because our original estimates were for a project of about $600 million, but by the time we got through buying the Dorset Hotel, buying the adjacent buildings, and thinking about the kind of architecture we wanted, we had a project of $850 million. And I had never raised more than a couple $1 million, so $600, $800 million was so completely out of the realm of what I thought was possible. I asked him, how could we do this? And he said, you know, my mother, back in 1929, created the Museum of Modern Art with a group of individuals who became founders. So why don't we create a group of new founders of the museum? So we created this category called Founders of the New Museum of Modern Art, individuals who contributed $5 million or more. Then we went to the city of New York and we said, we're going to build this project, it's going to be very good for you. We made very similar arguments about the economic benefits. We said, at the time we thought we needed $650 million. We said, why don't you contribute 10% of this? So they gave us $65 million. We went to the state of New York and we said, why don't you contribute 10% as well? They said, well, that's a nice idea, we'll give you $10 million. In my book, they owe us $55 million, but that's another story.